A real crime. In a series of podcasts, I want you to travel down some lonely roads with me. These are the roads I traveled with families who never got to say goodbye to loved ones. These family members were fated to live the rest of their lives waiting and wondering. I will begin this series with unsolved murders, but I will also revisit cases that include arrests because aspects of the case are worth re-examining. I wrote these stories when I worked as a reporter for the Charleston Gazette. Thanks for joining me today. I hope listeners will help me understand this phenomenon I have been tracking that relates to names. Shakespeare had Romeo and Juliet debate their last names. If their families were not sworn enemies, couldn't they marry and be happy? In West Virginia, we had our own version of feuding families with the Hatfields and McCoys. Episode 39, What's in a Name? If you were born into a family with the last name Slopjar, I can only hope you are a proud member of the Slopjar family. But if you're truthful, you would say that with such a last name, your life had been difficult at times. I happen to love trees and find myself a bit indifferent to slopjars. So all names associated with trees, wood, woods, woodrum, have that beautiful connotation for me. But over the years, I have been keeping a file on people with those names, wood, woods, woodrum, and the absolutely terrible things that happen to them or because of them. If someone has a beautiful name, I think they might lead a beautiful life. I would think such a name could even have a protective quality. But in my file, I have torturous murders, suicides, accidents, and a matricide that gives me pause. One of the earliest murder trials I covered centered on a member of a biker gang accused of beating a man to death with his belt. The biker's name was Donald Woodrum. John Arthur Woods of Beach Glen was drunk, but he drove anyway. He hit a couple in another car. The woman passenger died 16 days after the collision. Woods, who registered 0.131 for blood alcohol when he was tested, was charged with driving while under the influence of alcohol and causing a death. He entered a no contest plea, but he did not bother to apply for probation. He had already served time for voluntary manslaughter in a completely separate shooting incident. On November 18, 1987, former Governor Arch Moore issued a pardon that released Raymond Roop from prison. Roop went straight to the home of Charles R. Wood. Wood had a habit of marking the days off on his calendar. The last day he marked off was 2 days later, November 20th, 1987. Wood also distrusted banks and liked to convert the money from his Social Security checks to $100 bills. Wood lived alone on remote Gaymont Mountain Road. After people became concerned about Wood, they asked police to check on him. Police found Wood shot to death. His truck, guns, and money were gone. Roop paid for an unheated mobile home in Crown Hill with a $100 bill. In time, Roop was arrested. Roop entered a no-contest plea to second-degree murder and grand larceny. I've written many times about Teresa Woods, and her short life always triggers such feelings of sadness for me. She was just on the cusp of moving from childhood to adulthood, but she was murdered after she left school. Teresa Woods is a beautiful name, and she was a beautiful young woman, but she died in 1986. Her father, Donald Woods, was fated to grieve for her every day for the rest of his life. No one has been arrested for her murder. A 17-year-old male murdered Ann Woods in her home. He later told police he did not know why he killed the 73-year-old woman. She was his neighbor in Edmond. She let him in the house where she was born and would die. A police officer who worked the case testified that the teen cut his neighbor's neck from one side to the other. My childhood friend Carolyn Hickman grew into a beautiful woman. She married a man with the last name Woodrum. Over the course of their married lives, he beat her repeatedly. When she got the courage to leave him, he tracked her down. He shot her to death and then turned the gun on himself. He lived for a while. He was listed as a widower on his death certificate after he succumbed to the wounds he inflicted on himself. In 2002, Bonnie Woods Cale was a young mother who was also abused in her marriage. She went to visit her child, who was in the temporary custody of her former husband. After visiting her daughter, she planned to continue her journey onto her parents' home in Ohio, but she never arrived at her parents' house. Searchers found Bonnie's car in Webster County, and the vehicle had a pair of jeans and a coffee cup inside that belonged to Bonnie, but her child was in Tucker County. Bonnie was 27 when she disappeared, and she was missing for 7 years. A persistent family member, a dedicated police officer, and a leap in technology came together to find her. With the help of ground-penetrating radar, she was found buried underground inside a shed. All the cases I mentioned to this point I have written about, but as I explained, I became so fascinated with this idea that a beautiful name could not spare people from an ugly death. I clipped the following examples from other sources. A bellman was clearly battling depression when he committed suicide in public. Randall Leon Wood, 57, was talking to a police officer about his disabled car on the roadside. Then Wood rushed toward the median and jumped from the interstate near the Leon Sullivan Way exit in Charleston. The officer tried to hang on to Wood, and Wood almost pulled the officer to his death too. A 4-year-old Oak Hill boy, Charles David Wood, died after his house in a mobile home park caught fire. My colleague, Rusty Marks, covered the case about the murder of Eva Linda Woods. She was 59, and her 36-year-old daughter, Jessica Lee Woods, lived with her in the St. Albans area. The daughter murdered her mother and put her in a shed on the family property. Another Gazette colleague, Kate White, wrote about Jessica Wood's boyfriend. Sean Legg, 31, moved in with Jessica after she murdered her mother. Jessica told him she had her mother stashed in the outbuilding. Legg later told a judge that the two of them started brainstorming about how to dispose of the body. He also told the judge he did not realize that brainstorming such a topic was a crime. The judge and Jessica's sister, Sarah Beth Woods, both let him know what they thought of his brainstorming. Pause with me for a moment. All 3 names, Eva Linda Woods, Jessica Lee Woods, and Sarah Beth Woods, each sound so pretty. Why did the pretty names not guide them to a pretty life? My colleague, Joe Severino, covered the case of Arthur Owen Woods, whose wife, Starina Woods, disappeared. He did not report her missing, but when the police came to call, Woods, who was 41 at the time, told them he believed his wife stole $29,000 from him and went to Ecuador. Police could not find any record of her withdrawing money or crossing the border. They did find evidence that Woods tried to clean up a significant amount of blood in their home. There are too many Smiths in the world for me to find any kind of pattern. Maybe someone is keeping a file on people with the name King and how often they go first in the ice cream line. But I do hope some listeners can help me find light in these wooded forests. Thanks for joining me. Thanks to Tommy Siner for his always great work, and to Brenda Pinnell for her amazing technical skills. Please join me next Wednesday for a new episode of A Real Crime with Susan Williams.